Good morning, everybody, or I should say good afternoon. I'm Alexa Chapivsky, and on behalf of the Ukraine House Organizing Committee, these three other women sitting here in the front row, we would like to warmly welcome you to Ukraine House Davos. Thank you for being here. I'd like to introduce the moderator of our next panel, Ambassador Paula Dobriansky. She is the former Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, and she's currently with Harvard University. Please join me in giving her a hand. It is our extreme honor to have a very special guest with us today, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, Ukraine's top diplomat. And Mr. Minister, we would be remiss if we did not take this opportunity to sincerely thank you for all of your Herculean efforts these past months. Can you please stand and give the minister a thank you? Paula, over to you.
Thank you so much. Oh, you have the mic. The mic I need.
This one?
You have the mic. Excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone, and a really hearty welcome to you, Minister, and thank you so much to Ukraine House and to everyone assembled here. You certainly speak how we feel in your introduction, Alexis, and so thank you for that. I'm going to get underway because we have so much to ask you and we want to really use the time well. I want to begin with something that I did not know about Minister Kuleba, and that is in 2019 you wrote a book. And the title of that book, it was a bestseller book, by the way, The War for Reality, How to Win in the World of Fakes, Truths, and Communities. So my question right to you is, we are in the midst of countering disinformation, massive disinformation emanating from Moscow. Give us your best advice. How should we be doing that better?
Read the book and follow all the recommendations.
All right, but for today.
Yeah. First, I would like to thank the team that is running Ukraine House Davos for a number of years already. This is really important to have this kind of base, Ukrainian base in Davos. And I want you to know that I appreciate your round of applause, but I forward it to the people of Ukraine, to Ukrainian soldiers, and to all the diplomatic team led by the President Zelensky, who really changed something in this world in the last 3 months. My book is the experience that I gained from 2014, is a recollection of experiences that I gained in between 2014 and 2019, working as ambassador at large at the Foreign Ministry, in charge of strategic communications. And that basically was the attempt to offer people a very simple advice, to explain to them how it works, how this whole propaganda works, why do they buy it, and what should they do to not only to defend themselves, to protect themselves, but also to go on the counteroffensive against those who try to influence their perceptions and their emotions. And the 5 rules, which are the 5 chapters of this book, are still applicable. Control your emotions. This is the most difficult thing to do. Develop critical thinking. But if you have critical thinking but you cannot control your emotions, it doesn't work. So controlling emotions, and we see it in the last 3 months particularly well, is number 1, to avoid disinformation traps. So the third one is understand your community. How to get the community that you belong to, the community of your enemy, and how to best work with them. The fourth one, cooperate with the government. Because many believed that we live in a free world where freedom of speech exists separately from, and social media exists separately from what governments are doing. But in fact, to address the issue of cybersecurity, of disinformation, citizens and governments have to trust each other and have to build, and the last 3 months proved it extremely well. And I forgot the 5th rule, but which is again a good reason for you to read the book.
But I had confidence that you would share with us your advice, and clearly that advice is paying off, I think, in how you, President Zelensky, are managing the current really grave situation in Ukraine, given the war in Ukraine. So thank you for that. And I wanted to mention it about his book, because it's a bestseller, and so we will go out and get it.
And I didn't ask you to do that.
No,
right?
you did not. He did not. When I saw it, I thought, I have to ask him this. Let me go to a second question, which happened yesterday, I believe, here in Davos. And that was a statement made by Henry Kissinger, if I may ask you. He said in a Davos panel, he said, quote, "The conflict in Ukraine must end in 2 months' time, and an accommodation must be struck." So I'm not going to just ask you what's your view on his statement, but actually, how do you plan to deal with those individuals who, in fact, are pressuring not to pursue the war with the goal of an unambiguous victory here?
It was exactly 10 years ago that I had the opportunity to accompany Henry Kissinger on his trip to Ukraine in 2012, and I spent 2 very interesting days with him. He's quite a personality. He definitely has vast experience and understanding of the world, but I think that he simply expresses his view, something that based on the approaches and principles that he had practiced for years during his active service. So personally, when I read what he said, I do not estimate these words. They made a lot of noise in Ukrainian media and social media, but Henry Kissinger is Henry Kissinger. He's free to say whatever he wants. I don't see how this war can end in 2 months, because we do not see the willingness of Russia to end this war. But to all those who believe that Ukraine has to make another concession in order to pacify Putin, my answer is very simple. This strategy was being applied by leading powers of the world since 2014 until 24th of February 2022. Make a concession here, make another concession there, and this will help us to prevent the war. And it failed. So 8 years of this approach, of implementing this approach, resulted in missiles hitting Kiev and in the bloodshed in Donbass. I understand that for politicians it's extremely difficult to accept the fact that they were wrong and that their policy failed. But my message to them, it failed once, it will fail again. This will not stop the war. And if you really want to stop the war, you have to stand by Ukraine and help us win. I cannot imagine 3 allies, the Soviet Union, the United States and the United Kingdom, meeting somewhere in 1943 and saying, you see, in 442, saying the situation is so difficult on the front line, I think we have to reach out to Hitler and propose a deal to him. Maybe we should make a couple of concessions just to stop him, because we have to be reasonable. Or go back to the 19th century, a coalition is sitting down and saying, Napoleon, well, he's not a bad guy, he made some mistakes, but if we make a concession here and allow him to stay there, perhaps we can make a deal with him. There are cases in history where there is no space for this kind of strategy. The space is to stand by one, to stand by each other, and defeat someone who is posing a threat to all of us.
I think it's key, the message that you just conveyed. And let me just add, I use the word, there are just some, I use the word some, because there are those of us who totally disagree with that perspective. Ukraine must win this war. And not only that, be reminded, as you just said, of the history here. And in terms of why would one make concessions when there was outright, unjustified, blatant and brutal aggression. Let me go to another key issue that I think is on everyone's mind, and that is about the fact that President Biden recently approved a bipartisan aid package of some $40 billion. And my question to you is sort of two parts. First, how do you want to see this money used? I think it's important that your perspective guides this. And also, what are the major weapons that you want? And also, what should be the timeline for such deliveries? I know that President Zelensky really emphasizes time and weapons.
Yeah, to cut a long story short, my answer could be in two abbreviations, each consisting of 4 letters. The first one is MLRS, Multiple Launch Rocket Systems, and the second one is ASAP, as soon as possible. There are different types of weapons that should be supplied, and there is a certain timeline of supply, and the situation with the supply of weapons is much better now compared to months ago, and the United States deserve a credit for putting together this Rammstein group and coordinating all the efforts. But the problem is, I've had around 10 bilaterals here. And when I say to someone, I know you have MLRS, we badly need them, give them to us. The first question in response I get is, have the Americans given it to you already? So this is the burden of being a leader. Everyone is looking at you. So Washington has to keep the promise and provide us with multiple launch rocket systems as soon as possible. Others will follow. If we do not get MLRS ASAP, the situation in Donbas will get even worse than it is now. And I do not want anyone to have a feeling that everything is more or less fine with the war. The situation in Donbas is extremely bad. The sufferings, some villages, they do not exist anymore, physically, because they are in rubbles. If we do not get MLRS, we won't be able to liberate Kherson. And there are people who are waiting for that, and we cannot allow Russia to stay in Kherson, because if they do, they will have a strategic position to pose threat to central Ukraine, but also to southwestern Ukraine in the direction of Odessa. And they will keep stealing our grain. This is what they're doing. So this is key. This is key to making a game changer in the war. And I want you to also understand one thing. From the moment the announcement is made to the moment this certain weapon makes its first shot on the front line, it takes time. And it means, but what does it mean, taking time? It means that our soldiers have to sacrifice their lives to allow other Ukrainian soldiers to learn how to use certain weapons and bring it to the front line to help them. Every day of someone sitting in Washington, in Berlin, Paris, in other capitals, and considering whether they should or should not do something, costs us lives and territories. This is something that every politician should keep on his mind.
Thank you for the clarity of your answer, and the response is it needs to be done immediately, as you said, MLRS and ASAP. Let me go to a different topic, because you as a diplomat, I understand that in April that it was reported in Chinese press, their state press agency, Xinhua, that you had reached out to the Chinese and in the context of discussing there being a guarantor of security to end the war. And the focus you had, as it was reported again, which would be interesting, it's accurate, inaccurate, but it said that you were looking at all the permanent members of the Security Council to have this discussion. Bring us up to date as to where this stands in terms of the guarantors of security and your initiative.
Pretty much where it was when I called the Chinese foreign minister and I spoke on the phone. No, there is a very important discussion taking place between Ukraine and our Western partners on security guarantees. This diplomatic effort is led by President Zelensky himself and Andriy Yermak, chief of his office. Yesterday, I think Andrei announced the kind of the setting up of the international group that will be brainstorming new ideas of what security guarantees could look like. So this dialogue with Western partners, with part of the Security Council, is pretty much advanced. With China, we shared with them our vision. We did not receive any kind of meaningful feedback. I assume diplomatically they are still considering it. But as my president said today at the Ukrainian breakfast, answering the question about China, we see what China is not doing when it comes to satisfying or accommodating Russian requests for certain assistance, and we are fine with that. We wish China did more, but we understand their stance, and we will be keeping balance with China the way they do.
Well, it's good to know what your outreach is diplomatically, which is part of your role, but it's good to know also what's not happening and what's happening. So again, thank you for the information on that. Let me go to a key topic, and that is the one of energy. Here at Davos, I heard something that I had not heard before, relevant to energy, and that is that given the massive devastation and the attacks on the infrastructure within Ukraine, that none of the pipelines have been targeted in the energy sector. Is that accurate or not? That's sort of the first part. But the second is, what's your message? You know, here there are many Europeans gathered here at Davos, and they're very focused on this issue of oil and gas and their dependency on Russia, particular for gas. What is your word to them?
This is one of the most crucial topics to be discussed and to make decisions on when it comes to identifying how do we help Ukraine to win. The problem is the following. We appreciate the sanctions that have been already imposed. Some of them are particularly helpful as they strategically undermine Russian kind of sustainability, or they already made it impossible for Russia to produce more state-of-the-art weapons because of the sanctions. But as long as the European Union will continue buying Russian oil and gas, Putin's pockets will be full. And he doesn't, unlike Ukrainian leadership and government, Putin doesn't care how people in a town or in a village feel. I'm pretty certain that he receives daily update from his Minister of Finance saying, budget is in surplus, we have money to finance the army, we have money to maintain macro-financial stability. He's fine with that. But there is a much broader issue. If countries, I mean, since 24th of February, we heard a very clear message coming from even the closest partners of Ukraine. We will not go into war with Russia. We are not going to send our soldiers to die in this war. Fine, we accept that. But then you have to compensate that by killing Russian exports, by making sure that Russia doesn't make money on the global market to compensate, to finance its war machine. And to achieve that, you have to do two things. You have to stop buying oil and gas and some other stuff which is also important. You can keep some critical exports from Russia alive because of the importance for you. So this first thing, cut them off from selling gas and oil to Europe, and then do a very simple thing. Impose sanctions or a threat of sanctions on the shipping industry carrying Russian oil and gas, because the vast majority of Russian exports are being sent to points of destination by sea, starting with oil tankers, ending up with other vessels. If maritime receives a clear message that carrying Russian commodities and goods is something that should not be happening, Russian economy will suffocate. And then Putin will feel a difference. It's as simple as that, and the world economy will not suffer as much as some argue. But this is the only way to really put Putin in an economically vulnerable position. As of now, he feels pretty safe because he has pockets full of money, and the oil price for oil continues to rise.
And as you said, it's funding his war machine. Let me go to a topic that also has been discussed here at Davos. And I want to start, though, first with President Zelensky's statements. He has made a statement, in fact, in almost every forum I've been in, where he has indicated how it's not just about the war in Ukraine or a war on Europe, but it is a war on the global community. And he's made the connections in all the spheres as to how and why it has impacted the global community. At the Ukrainian breakfast this morning, it certainly came out in terms of the fact that exports out of Ukraine are, in fact, in this case, being affected. Countries like Egypt that depend about 85% on the grain, wheat from Ukraine, they don't have it. And you hear it around here, the term starvation, massive starvation in many countries, in Africa, elsewhere. So I want to ask you on this, can you expand on this issue? The fact that it isn't just a war on Ukraine. It is a war on the global community, and it's having massive geopolitical ramifications.
Yes, there is a number of countries who have been saying to us quietly, guys, this is not, we sympathize you, but this is not our war. Now that the food crisis is reaching them, they understand that this is their war. Russia is playing, a blackmail game, saying that they will unlock exports of Ukrainian agriculture if the West lifts sanctions imposed on Russia. Unfortunately, some countries are buying it. Unfortunately, I received a report today that one very important international official in charge of global trade is also buying it and is starting kind of to reach out and saying, well, maybe it's a good idea because saving people from famine is more important than imposing sanctions on Russia. While we fully sympathize everyone in the world who will face these massive consequences of the Russian blockade of Ukrainian agricultural exports, I want every politician, irrespective of his status or her status in international relations or the country he or she represents, before saying a word that sanctions should be lifted to save children somewhere in the world from famine, to come to Ukraine, to see dead bodies of Ukrainian children, to speak with parents whose children were raped by Russian soldiers, and shut their mouths up. This is... Some people in this world sit in nice offices and believe that they understand geopolitics and how it should all be arranged. And this war is happening somewhere else. Come and see it with your own eyes. In the last month and a half, we received plenty of guests in Ukraine. Some of them came with what they call a more balanced position. But after going to Bucha, to Irpin, after seeing all this destruction, after speaking with relatives of the victims, they all changed their mind. So we should focus our efforts, speaking about disinformation and pushing the wrong narratives, on countering the Russian narrative that the only way out of the food crisis, the only way to avoid global food crisis is to lift sanctions from them. We should emphasize a different point. It's Russia who bears sole responsibility for this global food crisis. And everyone should be standing on this. Everyone who defends the rule of law and international system as it stands should stand on that position instead of looking for ways to quietly play into the hands of Russia. And then, but I don't want you to overlook one important thing. There is export of agriculture, but in principle, Ukraine exports a lot of other stuff. And now that our economy is kind of not in the best shape, to say the least, and our internal market is gone, we in the foreign ministry decided to relaunch and to adjust our programs aimed at supporting Ukrainian exporters to work under these conditions. The European Union lifted tariffs and quotas for Ukraine. Canada, the United Kingdom did the same. So we in the foreign ministry have a special program called Nazovny. It's a website where you come, there is an office, online office that you have, and we will be helping every single Ukrainian company who wants to reorient from internal market to export market to find a buyer for its goods and services abroad in order to help them to make at least some money globally. So please do not overlook the other part of Ukrainian exports, which also require support, and we as the foreign ministry are helping them with that. We'll be helping them with that.
Let me ask you, you see the audience here, and you have a big community here at Davos. What is your message as to what they can do? What can the NGO community do? What can officials do? What can the business community do? What would you like to see them do?
Well, first they have to coordinate. Because when you have hundreds of ideas and hundreds of plans of how to help you, in the end you have nothing. Because everyone has to coordinate, to be in touch with the Ukrainian government, with Ukrainian civil society, and make sure that everything that is being done is cost efficient and it delivers. I mean, we achieve specific goals. It's really important. The second thing is, really I keep saying it on every occasion, make a very simple focus on a very simple statement of fact. Ukraine must win. Everything I do is aimed at one thing, to help Ukraine win. Not to save Putin's face, not to stop the war. We understand, I mean, Putin took all of his masks off. I think it's pretty obvious to everyone what his goals are. And the third thing is accept the fact that this may last for some time. This is not something that you can focus for 3 months and then say, I'm tired, I have to refocus, I cannot do it anymore. The future of Europe, and to a large extent the future of the world, is being decided in Ukraine now. This is the fact. And how the world will look like will depend on the outcome of this war. If Ukraine wins, freedom will win, democracies will win. They will become again more appealing to those countries who are choosing their partners and their system. If Ukraine loses, everyone else will win. And those forces, they do not like democracy, they do not like freedom. And in the middle between them, there is a big new phenomena called the new digital economy. They have their instruments of large scaling. They have their currency, cryptocurrency. They are becoming the third pillar of the world. And if Ukraine wins, the system will be oriented towards principles of pluralism, freedom, and democratic governance. If authoritarian regimes prevail, digital economy will become authoritarian too. I'm sorry for jumping into that subject, but I really think it's important to understand consequences not only for political spectrum, but also more broadly.
No, absolutely. Minister, we have time only for one last question, and I want to appreciate Ukraine House for giving me this opportunity to ask these questions. Just thank you for that in the time allotted. I want to ask you, I began with a bit of a personal question about your book. I want to end with a bit of a personal question. When I was diving in more on your own background, I didn't realize that you personally are also making history, because he is the youngest, most senior official diplomat, senior diplomat in history, in Ukraine's history. What is it like? This is one of the most crucial times for Ukraine. Share a little bit with us, because you have one of the most difficult mandates as a diplomat.
Some wise people once told me, a wise man once told me, Dmytro, you are young until you are 40. Everything after 40 is not young. I'm 41. Thank you for the compliment. It's good to stay in the club of the young. No, I feel some weeks before the months before the aggression started, Secretary Blinken was visiting Kiev to support Ukraine and to discuss how we can handle Russia's escalation. And we were sitting in my office, and we were talking about different scenarios, including the bad ones where the government of Ukraine would have had to kind of move somewhere else. And I said to him, Tony, listen, I have a personal interest in this story. I have no plan to join my predecessors, who in the last centuries of Ukraine's struggle for freedom had written their memoirs in exile. I will write my memoirs in Kiev, or maybe somewhere in a village in the Poltava region, where my father comes from. This is my motivation. A part of all the big ideas to save the country, to help the people, to kick Russia out. This is what drives me. To make sure that this country has future, that we get what we deserve, the respect that we deserve, and that in the end, all of us will be writing our memoirs in Ukraine and not in exile.
Well, your courage, your leadership, your deep knowledge is really to be admired. And I want to suggest we began by welcoming you and standing up. Please, let's again, and to pay tribute to you for what you're doing and what you're dealing with. Just let me say not only thank you, but Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava. And this will go to all of us, because one cannot win. Only a team can win. And we should all work as a team and win in this war. Thank you.